Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. So we continue where we were at, inshallah. And we wanted to note that, part of the problem when people are taking positions is that they don't know how to operate with knowledge. And what that means is that they stay arguing with regard to opinions that they hear from scholars. And they don't realize that those opinions were formulated to deal with specific contexts and specific situations. And so what has happened to a segment of the Muslim community, a segment of the Salafi community, not all of the Salafi community, but a segment of it, because it differs very much from other segments of the Salafi community, is that they begin to get caught up in statements that are made by scholars, and they deal with these statements as though they are proofs in and of themselves. The second issue is that, and this is something that I was mentioning in the last live on the part 1 before being cut off, is that unless you are following the minhaj or the madhab of Imam Ibn al-Hazm, rahmatullahi alayhi, there is no such thing as just giving proofs solely from the Quran and the Sunnah. And what that means when I'm saying solely is that proofs are not only that which is found in the Quran and the Sunnah and the understanding of Ahl Sunnah wa Jama'ah. If you were to look at, just say for instance, scholars that are accepted within the Salafi parameters. If you were to look at Imam Ibn al-Qayyim or Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, rahmatullahi alayhima, you're not going to find that they're formulating positions solely by following an ayat of the Quran and the ahadith. But there's something that's called wajhud dalala, and that is, what is the linguistic indication? What is this proof indicating to? You're not going to find solely also that they're just going to deal with the language in the Quran and the Sunnah. They're going to deal with other principles such as analogy. They're going to deal with other principles such as weighing harm and benefit. And so when we start saying that we're going to come to a position and you're asking solely for proofs, detailed proofs, by the way, from the Quran and the Sunnah, it shows that you're not qualified to have a conversation in these issues. يعني الأدلة يعني هي تنقسم إلى قسمين: القواعد العامة والقواعد التفصيلية، أو الدليل التفصيلي والدليل الإجمالي. And so the dalil, it is broken up into two categories. One category which we call the general proofs or the usul, and another category which is the detailed evidences, and which is what most people are stuck on. You're stuck on asking for an ayah of the most of people are stuck on asking for a hadith. They're not even really dealing with the Quran in that way. And so that's part of the problem, is that people are intending well and they want good and they want to practice the deen, but they have deficiencies in their understanding of how to deal with knowledge. And then they're following scholarship which should guide them on these points. What's more important for the Salafi community, and specific this Salafi community that is being addressed, is that you have an understanding of كيف تتعامل مع الأدلة. You should develop an understanding of how to deal with proofs, because you're calling to the Quran and the Sunnah. And because you don't have an understanding of how to deal with the proofs of the Quran and the Sunnah in detail, the specific ayat of the Quran and the specific ahadith, you don't have the tools to deal with that. You are falling into erroneous positions in the sense of not understanding how to deal with the Quran and the Sunnah. You're going and you're getting a fatwa from a fatwa book. Okay, that's fine. But when you start talking about that, you have an understanding of how to apply that fatwa in another situation, in another context, other than the context and the situation that it was given in, that's where your error is at. And no one is telling you that reality from the students that you're following, from the mashaykh that you're following, and you're in an erroneous position. In order for you to be able to talk about dealing with the proofs and not to talk based on your desire or to talk based upon your opinion, you have to have an understanding of usul al-fiqh. And so somewhere along the line, there's been a deviation from a proper approach to Islamic education that would allow you to really come into the minhaj of the Salaf as far as knowledge is concerned. A majority of the people that are given leadership in your community, they're not talking about how to deal with proofs when it comes في قضية تطبيق الفتوى. يعني في هذه المجتمع. That's the issue. How do you apply the fatwa in the context of this society? There's no discussion from your part on that. And as long as we keep going in this direction, I feel for those who are following that approach. Because what we're seeing at the tail end, which is not discussed, is we're seeing people burn out. We're seeing people fall out of Islam. We're seeing people 20 years later full of anger. We're seeing people feel as though they wasted their time. We see a lot of issues. We're seeing a lot of extremes. How is it that you're dealing with the Quran and the Sunnah 15 years, 20 years? And then all of a sudden, one day you wake up and then you say, well, I need a more intellectual approach to Islam. And then now you go against all of your practice that came before. That is backwardness. But that comes from the type of education and direction and guidance that you have been given is deficient. You shouldn't have to, if you decide that you're going to change the way that you do something in your practice, you shouldn't have to say that all of the time that I was with the Salafi da'wah for 15 years, for 20 years, for whatever it may be, and I was following the fiqh of the madhab of Imam Ahmed, or I was following the fatwa of Ibn Uthaymeen or Ibn Baz, or whoever it was that you were following, Fawzan. Now when you burn out everything that you were following, you come into a different approach. That means that you didn't understand what you were dealing with. And that comes from not having a nuanced approach. And I say that, and I've seen the same thing with the Sufis. The Sufis do the same thing. Once they burn out, and this is the average trajectory of the American Muslim or the Muslim in America. Once you burn out, you deny everything that came before. You don't know how to come into maturity, into knowledge. And so you act like there's no growing process. You act like the deen is just something that's put there before you and just follow it and that's it. That's not the way of the Sahaba. The Sahaba, radiallahu anhum ajma'in, they came into Islam gradually. And they were taught how to gradually implement the deen, and they matured till they became people that were in a position to serve their communities and leadership and so on and so forth, and in knowledge. And so we say, that, this is detrimental. The positions that people are taking, look, you don't need a fatwa to say that we have to defend human life. Whether you want to be out there protesting or not protesting, or whether you say your positions should be, how can you give the community knowledge of the Quran and Sunnah? Do it. Nobody's stopping you from doing it. What is your work in the community? That's what we're asking. You know what I'm saying? That becomes the question of what we're asking. This is not to be oppositional and create more fitna. It's out of concern and love. I came from the community of Philadelphia. I was born and raised in North Philadelphia. I grew up in a Puerto Rican and a black community. You know what I'm saying? And so I'm part of that community, right? That people are saying Islam came into, and people are saying that the minhaj of the Sunnah is raised. And actually, I cry. I can't go back to Philadelphia. My heart doesn't let me go back to Philadelphia. Why? Because the amount of taking of life. The amount of taking of life. There's too much life that's taken. I feel exiled from my very community because of the amount of destruction. So then you ask, what is the role? What has been the role of the masajid in those communities? What has been the role of the Salafi da'wah in those communities? And it's not to be negative. And it's not to say that there was no good, because I'm not of those people that bashes the community in Philly. I know that the Salafi da'wah has taken people off of the corner. They have taken people off of the block and have initiated a change in people, right? But it's not enough. It's not transformative. It's not something that came in and made those communities safe. It's not something that came in and made those communities better environments. It created a lot of confusion, right? And so there's other steps that have to take place. So fine, if the Germantown Masjid doesn't want to participate in protesting and this and that and so on and so forth, let's not make a big deal out of it. But you can't have the leadership of the community. You brothers cannot have the leadership of what direction this community is going in, because some of us are committed to the general well-beings of our cousins and our uncles and our brothers and our sisters and our mothers and so on and so forth. And if you're not ready to come into the community and do social services, if you're not ready to come into the community at a political level for change, if you're not ready to do social service change, if you're not ready to do counseling change, if you're not ready to do their basic grassroots doing food pantry work, not only in Philly, it could be in any city, and not only in those cities and places where there's need, then, don't talk about those issues. Just stay focused on what you want to be focused on. right? But don't come out like you're taking the position of where the deen is, because it's detrimental. It's detrimental. We're watching life being taken. We don't need a fatwa to tell us that that's wrong. يعني هذا شيء معلوم بالضرورة that is wrong. It's known by necessity. We have من قواطع الأدلة, we have absolute proofs that say that the deen is against that, the taking of life. And so, you're confusing. How did you get the issue of saying that is khuruj al-hakim, to go into protest, and you're applying that into American society? Explain that to me. At the end of the day, there's a lot of things which have to be explained. Like, there's so many analogies which have been drawn. There's so many takhrijat which are being made which are erroneous. And so this is a problem in Islamic scholarship, and some of you keep making this problem. My advice to you is to go back to the books. If you're not of that opinion, then there's no need for us to be debating with each other. What about the opinion in Usul al-Sunnah with regard to Jidal fi Din? Right? And for instance, what about the minhaj of the Salaf in this issue when it says that it's not from the minhaj of the Salaf to engage in Jidal? Forget about the issue of Aqidah. We're turning basic principles into issues of debate. If you're not a person that's qualified in fiqh and usul al-fiqh, then you have no room to talk. So there's not even a debate. You're not even qualified to come into the debate. Me personally, I don't like to talk about Aqidah issues because I don't like to debate about Aqidah issues. I personally do not feel that Aqidah is a terrain of debate. And when it comes to fiqh, it should only be undertaken with discussion. There's no need for debating issues in fiqh because there are clear rules and procedures for how fiqh should be arrived at, for how understanding should be arrived at, for how knowledge of the halal and the haram should be arrived at. And so some of you are debating on these issues, and there's no need to debate. The question is, at the end of the day, what is the Salafi da'wah doing for the black community? That's the only question that should be answered, in this situation. What is the Salafi da'wah? Those who are putting out all of these fatwa, and those who are claiming to be the voice of the sound Islam, what are you doing for the black community? Tell us, so that we can be supported, so that we can go back into these communities and what are you doing for the black community? That's all we want to know. We're talking about, and let me be more specific in my question. What are you doing to improve the conditions of the black community? And I'll put it like this with a caveat, other than teaching Tawheed from a book. Outside of that, what are you doing for the community? How are you stopping youth from being in situations which are precarious, situations in which their lives are in danger? How are you dealing with the plight of black men in these communities? How are you dealing with that? And we mentioned that before. I'm talking about all of us as a community. If you say that the streets are on your side, that they're coming into the community, you know what I'm saying? Then what is it that you're doing to be successful at that? Tell us so that we can learn.